It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I hope you all enjoy my conversations today. I apologize. I moved to New Orleans for 6 years and picked up a trait saying y'all whenever I introduced to more than 5 people. Today, I want to talk about an interesting process that has been an aggregate of a series of moments, experiences, and implementations over the last 10 years. And they've abstracted the profession, in my mind, of landscape architecture into a new paradigm. And that's how we can begin to start thinking about the next generation of regenerative infrastructure systems through an approach that we oftentimes use as urban acupuncture. How can we as landscape architects, who very readily understand systems-based thinking, start to define the new problems and seek new answers through pinpoint strategic moments of development and urban revitalization that can then breed systemic change? And so with that, I think first I need to share context of myself and how this kind of understanding and passion led to where I am today. So I come from the prairie. I was born and raised in Kansas City. I was raised on a construction site by a contractor, so today's conversation is going to be a bit more pragmatic and about implementation. So I apologize to those that are not wanting to hear that. When I came back from Kansas City from my studies, I took a job at a 100-person architecture firm with 2 landscape architects, and I learned how to collaborate. I learned how to speak architect, I learned how to speak engineer, and we learned how to instigate conversations, elbow into the table of decision makers, and talk more than just shrubbing things up. 2 projects out of the many years that I spent at that firm that are both at very different scales, but really led my passion and direction for landscape architecture, was the first rain garden permitted in a public works office in downtown Kansas City, and then at a totally different scale, learning and being immersed in a city government that was entering into a consent decree around their combined sewer overflow system. Fortunately, both of those opportunities allowed us to leverage a group of folks to create the first adaptive management green infrastructure plan in the country, because the leadership, the communities, and the folks in Kansas City did not want 15.6 miles of big gray tunnels. And right in the heart of that, Hurricane Katrina happened. And I was asked to move from the prairie to the swamp. I was asked that because I knew about water. A very different scale once again. But I was asked to come down and establish a program within the Make It Right Foundation as the Director of Innovations with a goal of changing disaster to opportunity. And it immersed me in a world of different federal funding mechanisms and the ability to leverage resources, to fund those resources, and to implement those resources. And so many of them are directly tied to systems-based thinking, but more importantly, system-based funding. So this is the transit-oriented development bus stop in the lower 9th Ward. We immediately then needed to find money and resources and define the project. It was not a private client. So it was an innovative funding mechanism of integration of public art to transform change. This idea raised $12 million in 6 weeks for the organization to get started. And the idea was to change the dynamic between housing and a low to moderate income community. It was to figure out how 98% of the folks can live in healthy, sustainable homes and communities, and then take that idea of innovation and morph it into replication across the country. Because so many of these models that we were exposed to in New Orleans were post-natural disaster funding mechanisms, but those same funding mechanisms apply all across the country to economic disaster cities. So the second project that formed this vision was back in Kansas City. I was able to return home. I was able to be around folks that I know in a landscape that I understand. But I also lived 3 blocks away from an abandoned school that had been closed for 15 years, suffered extreme blight and decay in the neighborhood, and was referred to as the dying zip or the murder zip code in Kansas City Star. So we first took a look at this school and said, this is an interesting model. This is an interesting model that we could look at with all the things that we saw in New Orleans and overlay economic development opportunities, overlay transit-oriented development opportunities and Tiger funds, overlay housing incentives, and then we had this new interesting model of philanthropy to cover that equity gap to maintain the status, the vision that we received from the community. And so through a very basic mapping exercise, transit hub, mixed-use zoning, and instead of looking at blight and vacant lots as a constraint, we looked at that as the opportunity with this idea of urban acupuncture. If you look into many of the urban cores, vacant lots, demoed houses, blight is an overwhelming obstacle. But when you concentrate that around a 2-block radius of your first investment, it's something that's attainable. 40 lots, 40 houses, catalytic, resource-rich environment needs to be brought life back into it. That was our approach. And then we received a letter of invitation from the neighborhood to fulfill that idea. It's interesting when you get the community involved and they are the design team. It's interesting what you hear through that process. It's interesting how it engages that process. And most importantly, it's interesting how it transforms the process. 12 months later, the Bancroft School was built. We leveraged 22 different funding mechanisms to cover $15.1 million of a project that had no debt after the project was done, completely led by a landscape architect group looking through the lens of urban acupuncture. Since this project has completed, we've seen a 28% reduction in crime in the neighborhood. We've seen property values increase by 40%, and they're asking us to replicate this model all over the city. Every city in America has abandoned schools. Every city in America uses those same funding mechanisms. And both of those processes allowed me to learn how to listen. I was a green cheerleader before those experiences. I didn't understand how to truly listen, and it allowed me to learn and transform and change the world through landscape architecture, and that's what I think today is. From my standpoint, today is not a declaration of concern, it's a declaration of opportunity. It's a declaration of opportunity that in any ecosystem across the country, we can elbow into the table and transform. Shortly after the Bancroft School project, we were asked and received a letter of invitation to come to the second poorest Indian reservation in the country and help them through the process of urban acupuncture. Dr. Ryan in the red shirt to your left started crying when this public charrette process started. And I took a step back and I didn't know what to expect. And he shared with me and he said, Tim, we're a generation of 7 generations. The 3 generations before us speak to the 3 generations after us, through us, the 7th generation. And the 3 generations before us have never been asked what they want in their house. They've never been asked what they want in their community. And so please be patient. That statement is very indicative of many of our urban cores across the country. We created a design that was based on the culture and the sacred cultural geometries of the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, defined new housing typologies. We just finished the 20th house, LEED Platinum Net Zero, rent-to-own home that leveraged $6 million of funding incentives, of Tiger dollars, of federal tax credit dollars, of housing incentives, and economic development around jobs. All of these systems have historically been independently thought of, and they can independently be chicken broth, but the analogy coming from New Orleans is that I'd like to make them chicken gumbo. We need to bring them together to elevate the opportunity. We need to leverage those resources into that ingredient-rich soup that we all so much love. But the reality is when I bring this all back now to green infrastructure, is we need to create green infrastructure ninjas across the country. There is $300 billion in current committed projects in over 160 cities across America under consent decree that can be designed by civil engineers and water resource engineers as big gray tunnels, or they can start to look at regenerative infrastructure processes through urban acupuncture and transform the urban core. I understand that it needs to technically work, but it can also have environmental benefits. It can transform communities and create jobs and economic development systems in one overlay. All of these things, we need to understand who the right players are, who the right decision makers are, and lobby to transform that process so we can have a seat at the table. And we're seeing that it's a very effective tool as we work in both Kansas City and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The gray solution is not working. We need to depave these streets and create road diets. We need to link community assets through green corridors and connectors. And we need to use our natural systems and resources to further define ponds and parks into an integrated, connected system. Our paradigm is rethinking the street. How does the street become a sponge? For thousands of years, we've been taught and trained, collect, convey, and discharge. That's the opposite of what we need to be thinking about as landscape architects. We need to capture it, convey it through bioswales and public realms, complete streets, and store that in amenities. That same graphic can create this. That leveraged an $80 million project and is currently under construction in Kansas City, linking these series of 3 major green infrastructure sites to also major BRT, bus rapid transit, and public transportation connections and complete streets through mixed-use downtown cores. Green infrastructure is a catalyst for urban revitalization. So much so that this interesting map of the riverfront in Pittsburgh, we see these 2 red circles. Be very weary of engineer symbols, circles, and dots on plans. Those blue dots and blue lines equate to $350 million of gray tunnel work that can very easily be captured in the public realm. But you need to understand the technical system and the argument. So we were asked to create a green infrastructure citywide assessment in a variety of strategic watersheds in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They're currently finalizing their consent decree as we speak. So we first said this is about an urban design exercise. We need to understand how to link the nodes, corridors, and assets within this community and overlay the technical understanding of high-yield stormwater watersheds. And so in this watershed in particular, it's about linking transportation corridors. It's around linking a VA campus and workforce development opportunities through a series of complete streets approaches of bioswales, constructed wetlands, and rain gardens. That system then provides strategic focus. That system then allows the housing authority to overlay land bank lots, to identify when strategic investments can reinforce that and leverage those resources together. That system can identify community assets, healthy corridors, housing infill and renovation, and transportation lines to address all of the concerns that many of us deal with on a daily basis. But understanding how these all come together need to be the role of the landscape architect. If we truly want to overcome blight and disinvestment in marginalized communities, we need to be designing regenerative infrastructure systems. We need to develop a holistic approach that is strategic. We need to lobby for change at the decision-making table. We need to facilitate and prioritize community-based planning initiatives so that they don't stay a document on a shelf, that they become incorporated directly into the planning. And we need to define innovative funding mechanisms to leverage these resources into gumbo. This is a transformative model. This young man is growing up in the highest concentration of LEED Platinum houses in the country. He earns his allowance by washing off his solar panels and cleaning his parents' car with reclaimed stormwater. It's a different paradigm. It's a transformative model. And so, to the room of green infrastructure ninjas in a city that might be competing with Kansas City in terms of green infrastructure, please develop holistic green infrastructure urban planning efforts focused on identifying opportunities that support regenerative and resilient strategies for catalytic redevelopment. And start that process before the sun goes down today. Thank you.